This is the Ed Talk around professional learning, and I know it is this session that's between you and lunch, but we hope to be filling your brain the rest of the way. After the first two sessions, I'm sure it's almost near capacity, but we'll fill it all the way up before you fill up your stomachs for lunch. Sound good? All right, so we have an esteemed panel here of Ohio State faculty who are also associated with the University Institute with Teaching and Learning, here to discuss more about professional learning that's occurring at Ohio State and beyond. And I'm Rob Griffiths, the Associate Vice President for Distance Education within the Office of Distance Education and E-Learning at Ohio State, and I'm today's moderator. So I will be having a few set questions to begin with, but obviously we'll be working through the Twitter feed of Innovate PL for professional learning. So feel free to share your questions or comments there, and we'll be able to bring that forward. But before we get going, I want to make sure our panelists have an opportunity to briefly introduce themselves. So we'll start off with Zoe.
Well, my name is Zoe Plakas. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Agricultural, Environmental, and Development Economics. Just finished my third year here at OSU, and I am here as a user of UTIL programs, many of them.
Sharing. Okay. I'm Kay Halasek. I'm director of the University Institute for Teaching and Learning and associate professor in the Department of English.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Cool. My name is Maurice Stevens. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Comparative Studies. I've been here for about almost 20 years now, and I'm here in part with for my connection with as a mentor with the FIT UITL, but also, and we'll talk about it later, it's someone who's helped to found a kind of pedagogy, an innovative pedagogy group.
Hello, I'm Caroline Berger. I'm the director of the Center for Life Sciences Education, and I'm a professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. I'm on the Faculty Advisory Committee for UITL, and we also have within CLSE, the Center for Life Sciences Education, we have extensive teaching professional development for faculty, lecturers, and graduate students who teach our courses.
Great. So now we know your names, your titles, and where you work, but we want to learn a little bit more about you. So help us understand more about what excites you or inspires you about faculty professional learning. Okay, let's begin with you.
Oh, I get to. Well, this is my day job now, and I have been involved with the Institute now for 3 years, but even before coming to UITL, I was involved in professional learning for graduate students and lecturers in my department in English. And what really excites me about it is understanding and helping those teachers understand themselves as learners, and to really work toward establishing a growth mindset for ourselves as teachers, which is what we often, and Jasmine mentioned this in the previous Ed Talk session here, and really working to excite that interest in faculty and see the growth in their own understanding of themselves as learners. So that's where I would start with that question, Rob.
Thank you. Zoe.
Sure, I'll go ahead. I like what Kay said about learning this kind of learner kind of mindset, because I think anybody who is in academia is already kind of committed to being a lifelong learner, and I am just curious about everything. So the chance to kind of get outside just my disciplinary expertise, but to learn about things related to teaching and all of the various kind of subject matter that goes into that, right? Psychology and sociology and all of those fields that relate to how we teach and how we connect to our students. That's just another kind of area of curiosity for me. So I think, why wouldn't I be excited about learning more about teaching?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm here and interested in professional learning because I think, well, number one, the university is fundamentally a space, a pedagogical space, a community of learning, teaching and learning together. That's what we do here at all scales, whether it's in the classroom, in our service, in our research, it's all connected. And I'm passionate about the possibilities that happen in spaces like that, and the fact that we're engaging or having to engage a complex system of challenges that requires a complex response. And for me, that's where complex response can emerge when we teach and learn together.
I think this might be echoing what at least two of you have already said, but I think teaching unites us here at the university. It's something, or it should. It's something we all do in various forms. And to me, that's what's exciting, is that we all have an interest in teaching. We all have a common language about teaching, and sharing that is exciting to me.
Thank you. I actually want to take a step back for a moment and level set. And we had a question through Twitter, which I think is a really great one, is help us better understand or help define what professional learning is to begin with. And I'm happy for anyone to share his or her thoughts.
I'll take a stab at that. I think professional learning to me means that none of us are perfect at our job, and we never will be. It's a constant attempt to get better, to improve the quality of everything we do. And I guess professional learning could include staying up to date on our research, but that sort of seems to be a normal thing for faculty to do, is to stay up to date on research. But staying up to date on evidence-based practices in teaching is not necessarily something we normally do. So to me, the professional learning, at least from the people who are gathered here for this panel, is primarily focused on what are the evidence-based practices that we should be using in our daily jobs that we don't do, and how can we engage in that continuous improvement and acquisition of knowledge and acquisition of skills in other parts of our job other than the research and scholarship that we all tend to agree on that development going on.
I'm really excited about this question now, because I hadn't really thought about the concept of professional learning as such until I was invited to join this panel. And so with thinking about professional learning right now, I'm thinking, it makes sense to think about professional learning as the learning that takes place while we're doing the thing that is our profession, our vocation, but that also that it's something that if we engage in a kind of intentional way, if we engage the literatures on teaching and learning, say, or if we that we can actually have a professional engagement with our professional learning. So I like thinking about it in both of those ways, so that there are questions that emerge about, how do we do what we do, and what are we doing in the context that we're working in.
And I think, Rob, you and I had conversations very early on when the Institute was first established to distinguish between professional development and professional learning. And what Caroline and Maurice have just articulated are some of the distinctions that the literature on professional learning draw. And that is that it is a continuous sort of growth model. It's something that situates us as learners rather than as individuals to be developed in a particular way. And so the distinction is one that I think really amplifies some of the things that we've already mentioned.
Well, I'll just add that to what Maurice said, that I had not actually heard this term professional learning, despite being part of this professional learning community. So I didn't really use that term to describe it. So I'm right there with whoever asked that question. And really, to me, it's just, this is my job, and I want to continue to get better at it. I take my role in students' lives seriously, and so I just want to keep learning, and if there's a term for that, great.
Great, thank you. So each of you come with a different perspective and point of view about how you're approaching this ongoing development, ongoing learning of the craft that you're engaged in. And what do you see as emerging as having real meaning or impact in the work that you're doing from the vantage point and perspective that you have at the institution?
Well, I'll start. So just to give a little perspective, I came into my role straight from graduate school. I had TA'd one course at the master's level, which did not involve teaching any sections. I'd never been a lead instructor for a course, so one of the reasons that I wanted to take advantage of so many so-called professional learning programs at Ohio State was because I felt like I did not have training as a teacher. So I think that there's kind of two levels to kind of answering this question. One is that all of the just small kind of pieces of the toolkit that I've learned through the various programs, so the Faculty Fit program that UITL started, I think it was the first year, and then, the the programs that were part of what was UCAT, the University Center for Advancement of Teaching, and now is part of UITL. All of those like specific tools of just, how do you create a rubric? How do you do backward design? All of the things that might be really, some of you may already know or may still be learning. Those were really important to me, and I've seen the products of that in my classes of doing that. But kind of the bigger picture is just getting engaged with this group at Ohio State that's really focused on teaching, and I think we have to acknowledge that this is a research university, and a lot of the folks here are really focused on research, and so teaching is often de-emphasized in this type of kind of research university environment. And so I think that, I've seen just the product of putting both people, human resources and monetary resources toward teaching. I've seen, some great products of that just in seeing more learning, more engagement from our students and a great professional learning community here at Ohio State.
I'll take a stab at this. I think that I see what's happening at Ohio State as being part of a bigger, very national and likely international discussion of what are the best practices in professorial jobs or the kinds of things we do at universities. And I think the national discussion is relatively new. And so being part of that and being really, I think, in some ways at the forefront of that movement is a tremendous opportunity for Ohio State and especially for our students to be the beneficiaries of the efforts that we're putting in.
So, well, first of all, I think I'm going to say that I think it has been a mistake to consider research, teaching, and service, the three kind of jobs that we have as academics here, to be separate and to treat them as having different value. Although we're at a Research One institution, but it's a mistake to think that we are not doing research when we teach. And it's a mistake to think that we're not doing service in our research and that we're not teaching in our, whatever all the other capital words are, right? It doesn't work. There's only 3 terms. But anyway, that it's been a mistake, and it's a habitual pattern that that ends up needing to be resisted, right? And I think actually that's one of the tensions. For me, I'm actually going to get around to what I think is emergent here. One of the tensions here at this institution and at many higher education institutions is that they're highly resistant to innovation because of the trenchant habitual practices that work against innovation. And I think this is one, that research, teaching, and service are seen as 3 different things when they're actually incredibly integrated, and they're all pedagogical practices that could be really enhanced and amplified if we were to think of them as integrated and think about how they feed each other. But another is that our systems for assessment, whether it's how students are assessed in classrooms, how faculty are assessed at their department levels, how administrators are assessed in the work that they do, that our systems of assessment, our practice of assessment are also retrograde, are also habitually working to reproduce the same old, and that works against innovation. So what I see as emergent and possible, some of it's has been organized by faculty and students and staff members in a kind of organic way, like the SPA group, where we have faculty, it's supporting pedagogy actively, but we also know that it's important for us to actually schedule SPA meetings in our calendar because we're interested in kind of amplifying our sense of livingness in institutional context that really works against that. What can it mean for us to work in this space in that way? There are folks who are getting together organically to do it, and now there's a certain amount of support for programs like UITL, UCAT, and other things to make that more institutional. But what needs to be emergent and is starting to be emergent is a kind of attention to systemic possibilities.
So I'm going to borrow a term that Ethan introduced us to in his keynote and admit and say, I'm Kay, I'm a radical institutionalist. And I think when I hear Maurice talk about these emergent themes that he's seeing and hearing, That's what I see really myself as a leader in UITL, as a faculty member at the university. That's really what I've been charged to do. And I think what all of us, if we want, and we can still be institutionalists, and then what was the other one? Insurrectionists. We can still be insurrectionists too, but I'm going to take this role as a radical institutionalist. And I want to point back to FAES, so the college where Zoe is, ODEE, Maurice and SPA in CLSE, right? So some of the units and programs that are represented here, to say that when UITL was initiated, we turned to just these kinds of programs that already exist in colleges, that already exist at this university, as themselves sites for radical institutionalism. The CLSE model for continued professional learning for faculty, lecturers, graduate students was one of those models. So I think we can turn, while it is, clearly it is a national conversation, and we're seeing these sort of emergent conversations, we can, in fact, turn back to ourselves, and I'm sure that you all could point to programs in your own colleges and own departments and say the same thing is happening there. The challenge that we face as an institution, and that we face in UITL in particular, is scaling those kinds of programs. First of all, knowing where they are. And if you do have something that you want to let us know about, contact UITL at osu.edu and tell us what's happening in your units. Because as we learn about those spaces and those individuals who are doing this kind of radical work to rethink teaching and learning and to rethink how we value it, that's when we'll begin to move as an institution at scale to make the kinds of changes in the disruptive innovation that is actually going to lead to improved student success. It's not UITL alone. It's not Zoe in her classroom. It's not Maurice with SPA or CLSE. It's all of us together. And that scaling is what is so critically important and so challenging. So radical institutionalists. I want to invite all of us to think at least partly and act with that particular mindset.
Can I just add one more thing that I'm seeing as emergent in thinking about teaching and engaging classroom settings is more and more conversation about, and this actually ties in a little bit with the conversation in the last panel here, but more and more conversation and really thinking about ways to engage understanding that competencies are connected with dispositions, and that we can actually teach dispositions in classrooms. Right? So it's not just we need to have tough conversations, but we can actually start teaching students how to have tough conversations that that need to be had to face the challenges that are serious. We don't have 50 years to figure this out.
Thank you. So we've heard a couple of things around SPA. We've heard things around FIT, which stands for Foundation, Impact, and Transformation, a part of a new faculty orientation process to pedagogical choices, right? As you are intentional and thoughtful about what it is that you want to try and implement in your classroom or for the student learning experiences here, what are ways that you're finding that students are responding to those efforts?
I can start with a recent experience. So I just implemented this spring for the first time the use of Packback, which is a discussion board, an AI-assisted discussion board tool to encourage students to ask better questions. So it's really a way for students to drive their own learning, to engage with the material in a new way. And I implemented this in an intro class in microeconomics, so in a class that there's a lot of lecture, there's kind of a standard textbook. Usually, there's 125 students, so it's hard to engage them all in class, even if you create an environment where students feel safe and comfortable to ask questions. And so what happened was actually, it was not very well received. And so that has been interesting for me to kind of reflect on, and part of that could be on my part, kind of how I was using it. And I actually have another colleague in my department, and I hope we get to talking a little bit about lecturers and teaching faculty in this conversation, because she's a senior lecturer, and I work with her and have learned a lot from her as an experienced teacher. And we have kind of been reflecting on this together, because she also uses the same platform with much more success. And I mean, I think that you know, what I've learned from this is, you know, I'm really glad that I did this. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to implement it in the future. My SEIs did take a little hit, right? And it, you know, it's, for me, I'm not driven by my SEIs. And many of us, even if we don't want to be, partially are when we're on the tenure track because they are taken into account. So I think it's it does make us more risk averse, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Is kind of the attitude, and I've certainly heard, you know, oh, don't make big changes to your class because you really need to be focusing on research. So I guess I'm getting into different territory here. But basically, what I want to say is that that some of these things will not be well received, and I think it just takes iterating and trying things and making your best effort to you know, roll something out in a positive way, but not letting that hold you back. And I'm interested in trying new things with my classes, and I'm going to keep doing that. And that's what I think we all have to do to figure out how to move the needle forward.
It's actually difficult to say how students react because I think students are individuals and individuals will react differently. My experience with implementing, with trying to change how I teach and improve how I teach has not been uniformly successful. So but I don't think, I think there are some students who will learn no matter what you do. There are some students who will learn better anytime you improve your pedagogy and do things and try to be doing the things that would be better for all the students. And there are some students who will be highly resistant to anything different. And we see this a lot in the STEM fields, anything different than the model they have grown accustomed to, which is I read a textbook, I highlight what I need, the faculty member stands in front of the class and tells me what's going to be on the exam. That's all I need to do, and I can move on through this course and through my career. And those students are really hard to sort of convince and to make them and to help them realize that there are dispositions and there are skills that they could be learning in the classroom, that they could be applying in the classroom, that they could be practicing as they go through their undergraduate courses that will help them much more in the future than that highlighting and memorizing concepts. So students' reactions are mixed, and I think that's almost inevitable.
So I spend a lot of time in my classes, people might find this controversial, but I spend a lot of time, like literally the first 2 weeks of the class, just working with students together to learn how to learn together. Before we even touch the syllabus, before we start talking about content, students start developing dispositions around not knowing, because that's where the learning edge is, or what happens to them, within them, when their capacity to understand the world, when their framework for, their analytic framework for understanding the world, when it fails because it encounters a challenge that's overwhelming. We spend a lot of time figuring out how to be in that space with a group of diverse people, which is what the classroom is. Things like student-centered learning processes or andragogy or self-organizing processes in the classroom. There are all kinds of things that I like to do with students that they find uncomfortable, that often do produce hits in the SEI and other things, because self-organizing can look like disorganized. Suddenly I'm disorganized because they're organizing it. That makes sense. And what I find it has been that even though there's a lot of discomfort with that at the beginning, and I'm constantly getting feedback from students, assessment is a big piece of what we do, that towards the end of the semester, students actually start talking about what we might call their mental health. They start talking about how they're able to be differently and feel differently about themselves, like actually feeling like they're enough or that they're worthy, or that their enoughness and worthiness is not dependent on how they scored on an exam or something we did in the class. So I count that as a positive impact. And I don't know, and it feels good to me too, because I also get to feel that sense of transformation and having my own worthiness not be dependent on whether or not every single student got a certain thing.
So in some ways, I have the luxury of having as my content area writing studies. So it's not content in the same way as memorizing historical facts or learning formulas or understanding rhizomes or whatever the content might be. But there's also a disadvantage to that, and that is students come into the classroom not only understanding themselves as successful learners by recalling content, but also as writers who have succeeded, generally speaking, very, very well with a particular set of practices. They've also been very successful as learners, right, with repeating content and regurgitating content and so forth. So a lot of the work early on for me, too, is actually having explicit conversations with students about and Jasmine mentioned this earlier too. They didn't cite Freire, she didn't cite Freire, but problem-posing education from Paulo Freire as opposed to the banking concept of education. So often what I will do is just lay bare how my pedagogy is different and very likely different from the pedagogy that they've been successful at. And that requires then a risk on their part to move out of their comfort zone as writers, right? Something like the 5-paragraph theme, where they're just articulating what other experts have said on a subject and they're repeating that rather than articulating their own arguments and creating their own understanding and contributing to a conversation. That's what I'm also asking them to do as learners, is to create that space. And that's risky for them. And you've already talked, Zoe and Maurice, about the risk for the faculty members in doing that. And so for us, it's always kind of a constant part of the conversation. And we're calling out those kinds of challenges. And I think that helps students. There are still resistors. And they resist for very legitimate reasons, because they have been successful with a particular set of practices. And I'm asking them to not only rethink, but actually challenge those expectations, and sometimes the values that go along with those. Foundation, the sense that there's an objective truth, and that there is something called good writing, and then I have to challenge them to think about both education and writing. So there's a real alignment for me here, just as a professional, that we're calling into question truths for them, and that can be very unsettling. And so I make that part of the conversation. It doesn't mean that there aren't students who are still resisting, and reasonably so, but I try to have that conversation. I also want to point back to mental health. One of the other things that I think is really important in pedagogy, and I've learned this from a lot of my colleagues who work in disability studies, but is to help students understand that the spaces in which they learn are spaces that they can also take charge of. That the classroom isn't just the four walls, of course, but also that within that space that they can use those spaces in ways that are going to advantage them as learners. And that's new to them as well. That they recognize, and we have conversations about classroom spaces, and I think at Innovate, where we talk about flexible space and flexible use of classrooms, and something that should be more part of our conversations about teaching and successful teaching, in addition to something like evidence-based practices, but how are we thinking about the classroom spaces and using those technologies successfully?
Can I quickly add something to that? So I just want to kind of piggyback on some things that have been said around actually something that you just said, Kay, about being uncomfortable and challenging truths. I think when we take on new practices as faculty, we're doing the same for ourselves, which is really important and uncomfortable. How is this going to fly? Is this going to hurt my SEIs even if I claim not to care about them? And one of the things for me that I've found really valuable is just kind of being vulnerable with my students about what I'm trying to do and communicating that with them and saying, this is something that I'm trying for the first time, and I want your feedback on how it's going. I've done that. I forget what the acronym is. It is, but the mid-semester reviews. The skids, yeah. So having somebody from UCAT, now UITL, come in and do an evaluation with my class, and that's where mid-semester, this spring, there are these challenges with Packback came up. I actually kind of changed course a little bit. I changed the way that the assignments were structured for the rest of the term, and that was really valuable to students and allowed students to, even though I think they maybe on net were unsatisfied with the way I rolled it out, or that tool, they were able to take some more charge of it. But that required me to be vulnerable with them, and so I think that's important to know. Kind of, and this goes back to what you were saying, Caroline, earlier too, about we're not perfect. I think being not perfect in front of our students helps them to see how they can also be vulnerable and get into those uncomfortable spaces themselves.
Thank you so much. We have about 15 minutes left, and I don't think it's enough time to break out multiple questions here, so I'm going to try to group some things together. A question that I had in mind coming into this session, as well as what I've been seeing through the Twitterverse here, focuses on a lot about challenges that we face moving forward with this work. But I'd like to reframe it a bit and talk about the opportunities that we need to solve for, the opportunities ahead of us for where we can go with all of this. And we've talked about you all as being part of a coalition of the willing to help move things forward, but there are faculty out there who may be resistant to this or are not necessarily willing to take that risk quite yet. We've talked about the differences between lecturers and full-time faculty, associate faculty, and opportunities that reside in that space for how we can move things forward. I guess, are there seeds that you see that we can be planting here to help advance and achieve the opportunities ahead of us to help scale and grow faculty professional learning in the ways that you inspire for it to be?
Oh, so I was just going to say that as an economist, I think a lot about incentives. And so I was very excited to see the university incentivize with salary increases the various kind of teaching tools and that were rolled out this last year, which I don't remember all the names of. But okay, I can talk about more if you want. And I think that is a great first step, and the opportunity I see is to look for even more kind of ways that we can incentivize these kind of improvements in teaching and professional learning, and that has to also occur in every unit, in every field, because if we're just doing this on our own, then it's gonna, getting back to Maurice's point, it's gonna be a hit to our research profile in our fields if we're spending more time on teaching. And so we can focus on this within the university, but we actually have to lead a change, further outside of just our university, but within all of our fields. So I think there's an opportunity to just be creative about the different types of incentives we can offer. And that looks, that's looking at, what do you reward at the tenure decision? What do you pay people for? How do you, allocate time within positions? All of that. And I see that as a major tool that we have going forward.
So I guess I'll probably come to this from the perspective of the things that we've been studying for all these years and writing about. I do a lot of work in critical trauma theory, and I'm really interested in how individuals and communities kind of respond in novel ways with new configurations in the aftermath of things being overwhelming and precarious and so on. So I'm going to say the seed of possibility, or the way that the new or the more that's possible can enter the world, is when we engage this complex system by engaging in safe to fail experiments, lots of quick, small experiments, getting feedback, and then seeing, is this something that's producing an outcome we desire? If so, I'm going to amplify it. And if not, I'm going to put that to the side and try something else, or let somebody else keep trying that while I go and try something else. I think it requires us to actually be bold, like truly be bold, and ask ourselves, where in our own systems are we impeding and getting in the way of the very transformation that we want? And there are lots of places in our institution where that happens. You could mark those as challenges, but they are sites of possibility. So can we engage, like I think Ethan, the keynote speaker, was talking about the experiment, I forget where it was, where a law gets kicked for a year and you try something out. We can try things like that. I think our limit is only our willingness to be uncomfortable with the bold experiment. And then, to see what works a little bit and stop waiting for for the evidence to already be there that requires us to simply do the same old crap. We really need, some of it's good crap, but some of it's not. So we also need to engage in the promising practices that are not yet best practices. We need to form evidence, and we have to engage in new experimentation to do that. So that's where I'd put my money.
So basically, this is a problem to solve. How can we how can we spread the word about professional learning at Ohio State? And there's a lot of evidence that the best problem solutions will often come from a diverse group of people working together to come up with the solutions to the problem. And that's why we ask our students to do group work in the classroom. That's why we know that in their careers they will have to do a lot of group work. That's why we work in committees often as faculty. I know we hate committees service, but often the ideas that will bubble out of a committee are more robust, stronger in many different ways because they've had so much input from presumably the committee was assembled from a diverse group. So I think that what the foundation for solving this problem of professional learning is in the fact that it's a group conversation at the university, and that there are diverse people working on this same issue and coming at it from different perspectives, and talking with each other about the solutions that they're coming up with and how those are successful or not successful, and working together to make sure that they are as successful as they can be. So I think that's the seed going forward from my perspective.
And I'm going to play off that, Carolyn, because I think that that diversity is cross-disciplinary, but it's also bringing together faculty, lecturers, staff, and students, right, to have these conversations about what works, when it works, how it works, what the challenges of the classroom and other learning spaces might be. That it's not just a crew of folks in my department, although that's useful for us to revisit our curriculum and to think about it, but to engage a diversity of perspectives and experiences as well. And that's why I think something like the kinds of educational spaces in FAES, right, where we have the work that you do in the field, right, and so maybe not as an economist, but probably also, but like working with extension, right, and looking at other models and diversity of models of education can also be part of that conversation. But students need to be part of the conversation as well.
Zoe, Kay, Maurice, Caroline, thank you so very much for your time. We really appreciate it. Can we have a round of applause, please?
Thanks, Rob.